Well, we've been talking about the victim mentality, and that's just the way things are, and it's never going to change. And God says, I've engraved you on the palms of my hands, and your walls are ever before me. And so these are two opposing things, because with God, it's never too late for his agenda to be established. It's as though we live in a different time frame than eternity. I got this book the other day, The Count of Monte Cristo. I don't know if you've ever read this. It takes place during the I think 1700s, 1800s in France. And it's a story of a man who was badly mistreated and wound up spending 14 years in a dungeon, and then his fortunes reversed, and he got out and did some stuff and didn't live happily ever after. But I say that to say that this is a story that I can begin reading at the first page, and as I begin reading this page, it's as though I'm, in a sense, transported back to that period of time. The people do different things. They don't go into their houses and check their email in the morning. They don't hop in their car and drive down the freeway. Okay, and so I'm reading this book, and as I read along, the part that I've already read becomes in the past. The part that I'm reading is now, and the part that I haven't yet read is the future within this time frame. But I can close the book and step back to this time frame, walk over to my computer, check my email, jump in my car, drive over to see my friend, stop at the supermarket. Okay, so there's a sense in which there are two different time frames. If I sat down and read this from beginning to end, we could probably do it in a day, a few hours. The events take place over a period of years, quite a few years. And so there's a compressing. Sometimes a book is written about an event that takes place in only a little bit of time, and it's expanded. But it's as though there's a different time frame. And it's similar to that with eternity. The scripture says that with the Lord, 1,000 years is as a day, and a day is as 1,000 years. In another place it says that with the Lord, 1,000 years is as a day or as a watch in the night. A watch in the night was 3 hours. And I did some calculations because 1,000 years doesn't compute to me in Earth time. That's too much. And I want to know what it is in terms of my lifetime, or in something that I can get my mind around. And so I found that a watch in the night is about 10,800 seconds. So 1,000 years of Earth time is like about 10,800 seconds to God in eternity time. And if we divide both sides of the equation by 1,000, we come up with a year of Earth time is about 10 seconds, 11 seconds. Now, of course, there's not a one-to-one mathematical correlation, but this is something that God has given us to give us this sense of a different kind of time frame, that God sees things from a different time frame. And what that means in practical things is that it's always now to God. There is nothing that's happened in our lives that's too far back, but what God can put his now word into that place. And the incident that I told you, or the circumstances around my birthday, is such a powerful example to me. That, you know what, that lie was established many, many, many years ago. Well, it's past. I can't do anything about it now. All I can do is just try to forget it and get on with my life, right? Right. Wrong. Wrong. Because God says it's always now. I have something to do with trouble. I have something to say into the midst of it, and it's never too late for my agenda to be attached. And see, I was born at exactly the right time. I could have never said that before. Well, if I'd had my choice about it, I'd never be born. Don't anybody ever be born at... No, I was born at exactly the right time. The Bible says that God knit me together in my mother's womb. And all of that stuff from the past is just stuff. It has no power. But it was 50 years later in earth time. With God, it's just a few seconds, just a few minutes. It's now. The most amazing thing is that as I look back now down through the corridor of my life at birthday after birthday after birthday, that lump of pain isn't there. That sense of, well, this is what happened, and da-da-da-da, it's not there. And God is beginning to bring to my remembrance some happy things that happened on birthdays. And the whole place is being healed. There was a lady who was just beginning to get an idea of this difference in time frame. And she said to the Lord, she said, Lord, is it really true that 1,000 years is like a day to you? And the Lord said, yes, it is. And she said, well, I also read that in the scriptures, you own the cattle on 1,000 hills. Is that really true? The Lord said, yes, it is. So you must be fabulously wealthy. Yeah. He said, Lord, could I have $1 million? And the Lord said, sure, just a minute. Another place in my life that was very bound was that perception of myself as dumb and ugly and worthless. Part of that, the establishing incident that gave that lie such power happened when I was in the 5th grade. I'd come into class one day, and as I went to hang my coat up in the closet, there on the shelf above the coats was a little throwaway paper that the milk companies used to give out. It was in the days when they actually delivered milk to your house, and they had little puzzles and jokes and cartoons and things in this paper. And kids brought them to school, and they shared them around and left them laying around and threw them away, and it was no big deal. It was just a little throwaway paper. So when I saw that paper on the shelf, I just innocently picked it up and took it over to my desk and started reading it. A couple of minutes later, one of the boys came in, and he came over to me and he started yelling at me, "Get away from that paper, that's mine, you're getting your cooties all over my paper, you stole my paper, stupid." And of course I responded very calmly and said, "It's not, it's mine, stupid, I got it from the milk company this morning, so get away from me." Well, then the fat was in the fire. Mm-hmm. And so in the midst of all of that, the teacher walked in the room, and I'm now caught in my lie because there are more kids around. And so I dare not say, well, okay, I had it. So we had what seemed to be a trial that morning. The teacher, my remembrance of it was that it happened and lasted the whole morning. I'm sure it didn't. But what happened was that the other kids in the class were en masse giving evidence that we didn't even get milk from that milk company. And the milkman didn't go by our house on that day. And well, she's always cheating anyway. Well, she lies anyway. Well, she steals anyway. And, well, those things were true. I mean, I did cheat sometimes, and I did steal sometimes. I hadn't stolen that particular time, but, and I did lie when I thought it was the way to get out of a problem. But that whole time, the pain was just washing over me because there was no one who spoke in my defense. Well, eventually the teacher decided, there's no way to solve this. He says it is, and she says it isn't, and I don't know. And so she said, well, I'll send a note home with Arlene at noon and see if they get milk from this company and so on. So now, my lie is compounded. I have to now convince my mother that I got the paper that morning. And so I go home and I tell her that I just happened to be coming down the stairs when the milkman was there, and he gave me one of the papers, and then I left for school. So she has no way of knowing. So she writes a note back to the teacher and says, well, we do get milk from that company, and yes, he did deliver milk this morning. I don't know if Arlene got one of the papers or not, but I haven't caught her lying just recently, so she could be telling the truth. So I took the note back to the teacher, and the teacher looked at it, and she just kind of threw up her hands and said, well, I don't know what to do. You'll just have to stay after school and figure out between you who's going to get the paper. So my strategy was that after school, I would give a token resistance, and then I would just say, oh, just take it. I don't care. So after school, he's up front with one of his buddies. I'm in the back waiting to get this whole thing initiated. He's obviously not going to initiate anything, so I finally walk up there and I say, well, what do you want to do? And he looked at me and said, I don't even want the paper. I just wanted to get you in trouble. Mm-hmm. And so there it sat, a dirty, black, ugly lump of coal in the basement of my memory bank. And it sat there for years. It defined me as worthless, stupid, and all the lies and all the names gained some power as my perceptions, reflections, feelings, and desires chugged past that spot. Well, no, a few years ago, I was going to use that story for an illustration somewhere. I can't even remember now where it was. And I thought, well, it's really, it's not that painful anymore, and it's something that happened. But and I started to write it out so that it would be clearly in my head when I went to tell it. And I realized that as I started writing that story, the pain began to escalate in my heart. And it was paralyzing. I thought, how am I even going to function tomorrow at school? I mean, kids can be cruel, and what if somebody buys into that? And I walked around with this load of pain for several days, and I realized that I had been in that place of veering off. I'd come to the Lord and I'd want to be comforted, but I'd veer off. What's God going to do? I lied. I go to him and I say, oh, that really hurts. And he's going to say, well, duh. Don't lie. That's not too hard to figure out. And so it took quite a while before the layers began to be peeled back to where the real source of the pain came out. And that is that, Lord, how is it that somehow I am more flawed than anyone else? I'm not the only one in the school, in the class, that ever lied or ever stole anything or ever cheated. In fact, when kids do it and get by with it, everybody thinks that's pretty cool. Why is it that there's something so wrong with me that the slightest misstep, and everybody knows it, and everybody throws me away? And as I was thinking that, it was like I was back in that room, and those kids are all yelling at me and screaming. And I'm just miserable. I'm sitting there paralyzed. And all of a sudden, the door opens, and Jesus walks into the room. And the next thing, he was sitting at my desk with me, and there was like a plastic kind of a bell over my desk and the two of us, so that the sounds were blotted out, but I could still see the faces. And he just began to talk to me. And he said, you did lie, and I want to teach you how to handle situations like this so you don't have to lie. But I died for that lie. And you are not more flawed than they. You don't deserve this treatment at their hands, and they are not more flawed than you. See, that was one of the things. I'm flawed. Well, I read in the Bible. The Bible tells me I'm flawed. I lied. I'm flawed. I'm trapped. I have a stake. I'm tied to a stake. But God's never content to leave us tied to those stakes. And so he walked into my room. He sat there at my desk and he said, you did lie, but I died for your lie. And I want to forgive you, and I want to teach you, and I want to heal this place. And it was the beginning of my commitment to not lying to get out of a difficult situation. It was not an instantaneous, oh, okay, so I'm not going to lie anymore. But it was the beginning of that. But years later, as I could look down the corridor of my life and see this piece of evidence and this piece of evidence and this piece of evidence and this piece of evidence, all contributing to the lie that I am worth nothing and that I'm flawed more than anyone else, dropped to the ground. It was a house of cards based on a false perception from the beginning. You are flawed more than they. See, I am flawed. But all of us are flawed. And Jesus died for our flaws. And so now that whole memory of the 5th grade, it's not a memory of the time when I was in the 5th grade and the whole class gave evidence against me and nobody stood up for me and It's a memory of this time when I was in trouble in the 5th grade and Jesus came to my room. It's so awesome. It's so awesome to have Jesus come to our room. He wants to deliver us from our misperceptions, from our faulty reflections. He wants to deliver us from the places that lead to death. But it takes a clear, resolute decision on our parts to let God into those places. God won't storm in, but He'll come in when He's invited. Changing our perceptions has to do with changing our focus. So many times when things happen to us that we term bad, our focus is, why is this happening to me? When we stop and think about it, the corollary to that is, why isn't it happening to someone else? But sometimes it's, why does it have to happen at all? And I don't have all of the answers to that, but I have some clues. We'll talk about, a few lessons down the line. But for right now, what we want to think about is, what's going around in your head right now? I wonder if there is an incident, event, circumstance in your life that God is showing you has carved and fashioned who you are, that still has the power to comment about you, about your worth, about your flawedness in relation to other people. God has something to say into the midst of that. Trouble, He says, is my sheepdog. It's intended always to crowd us up to Him. The power of painful events in our lives springs not from the events themselves, but from our response to those events. If the pain from the past is still wicking into the present, it's because we've never changed our response to those events. We're still thinking about them the same as we have all the time. Good news. God wants to change the way we think about the events and circumstances of our lives. And in the process of doing that, He opens us wide and sets us free. The invitation is there. The offer is on the table. It's up to us to accept it or reject it. When I was single, one of the things that I liked to do for people for Christmas, especially if they had a bunch of little kids, was to give them coupons. I'll babysit for you. There's an older lady in our apartment complex who has a little dog, and she's not in real good health. And so last year for her birthday, I gave her some coupons for dog walking on dark and stormy nights. those coupons are still sitting in drawers somewhere. God has given us in this book so many coupons. They're offers that are on the table. They're there, just waiting for us to receive them, to take them, and to give them more power in our lives than the lies that we believe. God's done all the work. Just as I did with my coupons, I had my little satchel of things to take when I went babysitting. I have every intention of taking the dog for a walk on a dark and stormy night. But we have to accept the invitation. We have to take the coupon and present it to God. And let Him redeem it in our lives. That's what He longs to do in each one of us. And may each one of us take to heart the agenda that God has planned for us, to open us wide, to set us free, to drench us with joy, to thrill us with the visions of who He is and what He longs to do in us. A vision that carries us beyond the immediate escalation of pain when He touches something that we've buried. May He bless us abundantly to that end.